Welcome everyone back to the part 2 of our Living Loving Relationships. In our first session, we were talking about what relationships are, the importance of spending quality time with loved ones, how to form, restore and maintain loving and dynamic relationships, and how early influences can affect our future relationships. And before we get any further, let's just start with a word of prayer and then we can get into our discussion. Dear Lord, thank you so much for yet another opportunity to discuss how to maintain, restore, and have loving relationships with everyone and with you as well, most importantly. We ask you to be with us now, to open our hearts and minds to receive the instructions that you have for us. And please be with our guest speaker, Jenifer Skues, and guide her as well. We ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
So thank you again for being with us, Jenifer. It's been a blessing.
I get blessed too. Everyone gets blessed.
Yes, you by sharing and us by receiving.
That's it.
Yeah. So we talked about how our future relationships are very dependent on our experiences and history of our past relationships, which in turn affects future relationships. So can you tell us a little bit more about that time orientation?
Okay. The time orientation I developed as a model over probably a couple of decades ago when I was working at a psychiatric unit. I used to have to do a lot of teaching and counselling. So I found that time orientation was most interesting for people who don't function well, often live in the past or fear the future. So I put together the model because we only have the present moment. So what happens in past history, we've had experiences, and they can be what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly, basically. They can be good experiences, they can be highly traumatic experiences. The majority of people I know have actually had trauma, and we talked about some of that in our last session where we were saying how trauma is relevant. What might not be traumatic to one can be traumatic to another. Hence you find a family where one functions well and one doesn't and they both subjected to the same trauma, but the interpretation is powerful. So how we individually interpret what is happening to us, and from conception to birth, there's a programming process, and we do take on mum's emotions about a month before we're born, and that relationship has to develop, and we don't have an active thinking brain because we've got several parts of the brain. The main brain function that develops and then kicks in at when we're born up until about 2 is the emotional brain and the survival brain. So a baby doesn't remember things in that memory sense of remembering an event necessarily, unless it's highly traumatic. It can be a bit before 2 or a significant event, but generally it's emotionally loaded. So we have emotional memories pre-2 that go way back. So this is where how they're dealt with, the relationship with the mother is very powerful, and I know we're going to explore that a bit more as we go. So it's in those first 2 years the die is set as to our personal development, and as the thinking brain develops, that's when whatever that experience is prior to 2 years of age, emotionally, whether it be traumatic, healthy, unhealthy, then we then plow forward, the personality develops and we grow with that. We have the childhood, teen years, adolescence, and then we go into adulthood. So where we are in the present moment is very relevant to what we've experienced and programmed, particularly pre-2. That sets the foundation. I mean, the good news is you can change anything you want to as long as you know what you want to change and how to change it. And this is where I work with people. I can't go back and change it, but I can work in the present moment on that time orientation, because what we're doing in the present, if you haven't resolved the past baggage, you keep acting it out in the present moment, particularly emotionally. That's what I call a loaded gun. When we're triggered, something triggers us. If we've had a traumatic time and we've got all these intense emotions attached, we then have a huge emotional reaction that's an overreaction to the event. And most people don't realize it. I'm now aware of it. I'm going, hang on, I'm overreacting here because I've learnt this. But most people don't. They will then project out and blame or find a reason why they're reacting that way. And most people don't want to actually take it on board. They'll defend themselves versus resolve it because they don't know how. When the conscious mind doesn't know what's going on, because the brain, to work smart, has to have information. The more we know, the smarter the brain works. So this is why education and learning these things and understanding we're living in a time warp. Trauma in the present is the past lived in the present. Some people actually have flashbacks, but a lot don't. It's more about that early childhood stuff that's buried. We don't remember it. And we can explore that a bit more as we go. So then what's going on? We're in the present moment and we can't function well. And we're caught in this time warp of the past. But what happens is we don't know that. We are putting everything into the present. All we know is I'm here now and I'm suffering. Right? Or I'm here now and I'm a happy, healthy person. We don't question it. Yeah, but I don't. Most people have things to work out in the present. You know, we're far from perfect. We have a nature when we're born, and about 50% is genetic, wired in, and then it's pruned or it grows as we grow and develop. And it's on a continuum from a positive to a negative or a negative to a positive. So this means where are we on that continuum? And because the brain doesn't understand it, it just tries to look for reasons why in the present. But this is what counselling is about, to help people understand why I'm reacting this way in the present and where might it be coming from. And one of the things that I found with helping people in the present with trauma is not to get them to recall a traumatic event, but to really look at how am I reacting in the present based on a trauma that's happened in my past. And your emotional barometer will tell you that. So when I talk to people and find out what's your life like now, how bad is it, how good is it, and let's look at that, then I know trauma, that they are reacting to trauma. The bottom line for trauma goes back to feeling rejected, abandoned, and not having an attachment of any sort on our own, isolated. And we talked about that in the first session about what it's like to be isolated and how it affects us. So this is that timeline again. And we mentioned about COVID. Well, in the present moment, everyone was suffering from isolation and all sorts of awful things, which would have triggered a lot of past people, either memories or emotional memories. Majority of memory in the present is emotional. About 90% can be the loaded gun when we react to an event. Okay, it's not in proportion to the event.
It's not the present itself, but it's like what happened in the past.
Yes, is brought up emotionally because we've got emotional memories, and the brain will put a lock on it because it can't cope with that feeling. It's too intense. So it puts a lid on it and buries it. And this is where in the brain we have two memory banks. One is like our working memory, long-term, short-term memory, and that's the hippocampus, and it stores those memories, whereas there's another part, the amygdala, and there are only small areas in the brain, but the amygdala stores emotional memories. And the size of those little areas in the brain can actually grow and shrink depending on loading memories in and how we're using them. So, and they're the neuroplastic areas. They're the only two areas in the brain that we have that flexibility to make new cells and use them and change. Yeah,
Wow.
so this is
That's
why I
good,
know
isn't it?
you can change anything. It has to be in the present moment because we can't go back and change it. So this is where wisdom, insight, light bulb moments, looking at that connection between past and present. And sometimes we can do it ourselves, but often you need a bit of help to do it. Or even people do a program online. You can go on YouTube. They might find that they have books that they read that turn the light bulb on. I encourage people to study how your brain works because it will give a lot of insight, and it will also help you to navigate how you can change things. So,
Yes.
so what we do, what I call the unresolved past emotional baggage is sitting there, and that's buried on the subconscious level. It's not on the conscious level. The conscious level keeps a lid on it, and if there's a trigger, the conscious mind hates suffering. So this is where we do bizarre things in the present. We might develop an addiction. We might take off, and I know people who go, "That's it, I'm out of here. I'm not." You leave a job, leave home, leave a relationship. So all sorts of things can happen based on that memory that we're avoiding. Okay. Now the other problem is, when we look at the past, it's actually we get depressed. Okay, so when you're in the present and you think, like, if I go over, oh, that was terrible, that relationship, how awful that was, and look what happened to me, and what my friend did to me, and it was awful, we get depressed, right?
Yeah.
Or I lost the job and I couldn't get on with people at work. So they're all to do with relationships. We then project into the future, right? And that is what we call future fear projecting. We can do it about relationships. And I've heard people say, oh, my marriage failed and I'm to blame, and I'll never have another relationship again. Nobody will want me. We're now projecting into the future, right? And so it just depends on circumstances as to what happened in our relationships. Of course, grief and loss. If we lose a loved one, then we're going to grieve, but it doesn't mean we can't look at a positive future, but depends on the individual and their negative, positive bias and how they're programmed and what their beliefs and values. It's a very complex process, and it's very individual, which is why counselling isn't just one process. We have models. I use the models, but it's individual for everyone. So this is where you create your own story from the model. So if I got you to do a timeline of your past, what you knew way back, even what your mum was like or how she was when you were born. There are things you can find out. Go through and do a timeline of what you do remember or know, because it's unique to you. But that gives you clues as to why things are happening the way they are in the present, particularly about our relationships. All right? Yeah. And then we project that into the future. And we have a lot of future fears. Okay. In the present, it has to be solution focused. So again, this is about, okay, well, if this is the problem I'm fearing, what can I do about it if it happens? I call it a what if plan. We do a lot of what ifing. What if it doesn't work? What if things go wrong? And I know people who have met someone they really like and get on well with, and then they do something to sabotage it because they fear that the other person's going to leave them. So they do it first. Yeah, that's a common phenomenon. So that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. So this is about helping that person to deal with those future fears in the present moment, what I call the what if plan. And how many things have actually, when you do the what if, how many things actually did come true? And it's Mark Twain had a saying. He said, I've been through some terrible things in my life and some of them actually happened. Right? Yes. We keep projecting. We keep believing the worst. You can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you really believe something's going to happen that way, you actually set it up. The brain already sets it up, and it's like a role. You will play out that role and sabotage in the future because you believe that's what's going to happen. So there's a lot. We have a lot of power, misplaced power, personal power, or how we use it in the present. So the healing process isn't in the past. It isn't in the future projection. It's in the present. So this is where we have to learn and grow and understand. And I find sometimes just telling me their story, is a huge step in the healing process.
Mm.
And often when you write a timeline, you find, oh, I forgot about that, and you add things in as you go. So that way we're building our story. If it's too traumatic, you won't remember it. But once you start the release work in the present and you resolve things, you start having different memories. Now, when it's in a relationship and it's traumatic back further, like in our history, once we have dealt with the emotional charge of that relationship in the present, and we can talk a bit about how we do that. It's very simple. It's mainly breathing, calming the heart rate and refocusing. But when we do that release, you eventually have the memory, but it will be an awful memory, but you won't have the emotional charge attached to it. So that I can remember, like I have a family member, we just didn't get on at all. It was terrible. We were enemies, public enemies, number one as we were growing up. And I find now we've resolved that. And even though I feel sad about some of the memories and I know I was instigating, so I look and I don't like what I did, but I don't get the emotional charge of the anger or the pain. That's gone because I've resolved it. I've released it. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
There's a whole process. I do a program on, I have done on safe trauma recovery, because we're not really going to spend a lot of time on that process. This is more about the relationship dynamics and how they develop along the way. But the simplest thing in the present, when we know we're going through something, and we don't know what we've dragged up, we just know emotionally I'm reacting. And how do you know you're reacting to something from the past? Because it's an overload. You are overreacting. You know, someone might say something to you, a friend or the person you're married to. Next thing, you got all this stuff coming out, carrying on and upset and all that sort of thing. Yeah. You're overreacting. And they go, well, what did I do? What did I say? I only meant this. So this is where we have to learn to recognize the emotional barometer, be able to then step back from it and own it. And that's where you breathe it through. This is just the simplest technique. So you do slow, focused breathing, but focusing on the heart, because the heart is overreacting and the brain won't settle and reorient to the present while the heart's reacting. It's spiking and all uneven. So sometimes I get, if they're on their own, put your hands on your heart. They find scientifically that calms the heart down if you cover it, which is interesting, isn't it? Because when we have a shock or a trauma, we often grab that area. So this is where, if we slowly breathe, about 5 in through the nose, about 5 out through the mouth, and just focus on the heart while we're breathing. It's called heart focused breathing. Then after a while, you'll feel everything calming down, because what you're doing that, once you calm the heart rate, your autonomic nervous system that's got the charge from the past coming up releases it. It doesn't push it back in. We're so busy. Because you think when you have something that is traumatic for you, if you think about the past, when you have something that's traumatic, what do? You react to it, but what do you do with it? You can feel it coming up because the adrenals kick in. We go fight, flight, adrenaline kicks in, you feel it coming up and it gets to here. What do you do with it if you don't know what it is or why it's happening? You hold it in. Push it down. Try to push it back in. You hold your breath, do all those things, because you don't know how to release it. So the simple thing of calming the heart and breathing is the most powerful thing you can do at that time. Then do things like maybe write it down and what you learned or what you think it was. You know, do some journaling. And then the other thing you can do is do something that is what we call very mindful, like the breathing is, but then maybe have a nice, if you like, showers or a bath, or go for a walk, or go to the beach, or do something where you're in the present moment that is pleasant. That will help the whole nervous system to settle and keep releasing that charge. Okay, so how we manage. I mean, eventually, if you want to, we can do maybe a session on this sort of thing of what trauma is and how do we deal with it and better ways of doing it. So that in itself is something
that is a good idea. Yeah, because a lot of us, we don't realize, again, like you said as well, we don't realize that the way we react in the present is
Mhm.
because of the past.
Yep.
And my question on that is that what determines though who is going to be traumatized by the same event? If, like, a lot of the times I've gone back and thought it doesn't seem like it was a big deal, and so I
Mhm.
feel like I shouldn't be traumatized by it,
Yeah.
and someone else, someone else would deal with it a lot
Different.
better.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is where you can have a family of, say, 3 or 4 children, and they're in a traumatic environment because dad's angry and aggressive or mum's overreacting, and there's all sorts of reasons why. You will
Yeah.
find that one child out of that might be highly traumatized and totally affected through their life, whereas 2 of the others aren't, because
Yeah.
their way of feeling, oh, yeah, dad's going off again. Here we go. It's not my fault. They don't own it. They'll get out of the way and go and play or do something and not engage it. Whereas the other child who's traumatized blames himself. Oh, it's all my fault. Dad's so angry, and
Yeah.
now he's hurting mum, and do 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 do. We do all that, so we then do self-blame, dump on ourselves, go into fear mode, don't know how to
Yeah.
release it, swallow it back in, and then we are on edge, and we're actually staying in the trauma, and then we think about it. And when you think about a trauma, your body's reacting like it's happening again. So this
Yes.
is why it's not good to recall trauma memories without processing them and doing that release work, because we're just loading it in, which is why post-traumatic stress disorder, which majority is through relationships, a lot of it,
Mm.
is active in the present and growing because we keep reliving the past in the present. This is why that past, present, and future model is very essential to understand the time orientation and work very much in that mindfully in the present. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. With the early relationship development, obviously, it seems like some of it can be genetic, right? It
Mhm.
can be,
Can be.
we can be predisposed to maybe being more sensitive to
Yes.
the events around us, so it can traumatize more than,
Yes.
like you said, the sibling, for example. And I can see that happen in our family as well. Like, if April sees that I'm upset, she'll say,
Mhm.
"Oh, let's leave mommy alone. She's upset." But I know that maybe I would internalize more and think my mom is upset with me because I
Yes.
triggered it somehow.
Yes.
Whereas she will just go off and, yeah, like you said, play
Oh,
on
well,
her
mum's
own and
having
be
a
like,
bad day.
yeah, I'm just going to wait. Yeah.
And
So
this is
the
yeah, interpretation. You're just telling me her interpretation and yours.
yeah,
That's the link to the trauma. If I interpret it in a traumatic way and go into blaming myself, and then I'm fearing mum and I'm treading on eggshells because she's going to yell at me if I do the wrong thing. Whereas the other child, oh, well, mum's having a bad day. I'm going to get out of here and go and play somewhere. Or so, and there is one of your questions was about the genetic factor, is there are children who are more what I call robust in their personality, and it affects them less. And there are children who are far more sensitive and more prone to anxiety, possibly. We can even, because there are genes that can relate to depression, anxiety, which is a fear orientation. So we can actually have that gene, but what we need to know is that genes don't predict, they are triggered, they're switched on and off. So just because we have a genetic predisposition does not mean it's set in concrete and that's it for the rest of our life, because environment, and this is where a child in a traumatic environment or they're overly sensitive and personalized things, it can switch on the gene that contributes. Okay, whereas the child that is more resilient and doesn't do that is strengthening the gene pool. So this is where, yeah, and a lot of people don't know that because often they think, oh no, it's genetic, I've got no choice. We can change anything as long as we know what it is and how, but we can only do it in the present moment. We can only change the past in the present, we can only change the future in the present. So this is, again, that time orientation.
Yes, definitely. So then, In those early ages, like up to 2 years old, that you were talking about as well, that we are not, I guess, consciously making decisions. What are the parents' role, both in positively and negatively? What can they do to affect that?
Okay. Well, there's quite a lot that makes up that unresolved baggage. And yes, it can be to do with parents, okay, because from conception to birth, if mum is in a traumatic relationship or having a trauma, or she might be depressed or anxious, or she might get sick and have to go to hospital, things that affect the fetus and that developing baby. Okay, and as I said previously, about a month before we're born, we take on or program in some of mum's emotions. So that means if she's anxious, we've already the brain's already developing that. Okay, so there's the genetic factor as well as that prior to birth. So fetal development is crucial. Mum has an accident, or dad's violent, or and I'm not saying everyone's been through that, but we know, we just look at the news and those things exist very much. So that will have a huge impact on the child. But even if it is prenatal, after birth and through their life, some of that can be changed, because we can actually help the child reprogram even as an adult. It's never too late, because the brain constantly changes and grows. Okay.
Yes.
Once you're born, then the models kick in, and your primary caregiver is mum. And mum, a mother who is a nurturing mother, and I can only say that not all mums have that capacity, because it is part of your makeup, as well as if you have a nurturing mother, you've had a good model, then a more nurturing mother will be in tune with the child. And that means, and I know you'll think of your experience, for example, when you have, and it's hard with your first one because you're learning what means what. So if the baby cries, is it they've got a wet nappy? Is it they're hungry? Is it they're distressed? Is something disturbed them? The mother starts to intuitively pick up on that, because the mother and the child have that heart connection, right? Which is why the baby should not be separated from mum at such a young age. They say, because one they're still feeding from mum, there's that bonding, because that's a bonding ritual when she feeds from mum, preferably breastfeeding. Not every mum can. I'm not decrying that, because how they treat the child when they're feeding is crucial. For example, I knew of someone who, she was not at all maternal, and I know the son, and what happened when he was born, she would put him in the pram or the crib and prop the bottle up and go away and let him feed. So he didn't have that connection, didn't have the bonding, and that did affect him. He's resolved a lot of things, but you can see how a mother treats the child. She needs to stay connected. And this is why we get that separation anxiety with children if mum leaves the child in a state where they're feeling separated. And that's a hard one, because if a mother might need to go out, like if a mother's sick and has to go to hospital and the baby doesn't go, is under dad's care or whatever, there's a separation anxiety, because that heart connection, which they say quite a few feet distance with that connection, is broken. So that child is suddenly unattached, if that makes sense. And it's not because mum deliberately did anything. When you're sick, you're sick. You see, so it's really, but when mum comes home, say she's in hospital a week, gets well, send her home, what she does with her baby then, as it's developing, will reestablish the link, and it can heal the damage done when she went to hospital. Okay. A baby, if you've made a mistake and you misread the baby's cry or intent, the mother coming, and her role is to help a child regulate emotions, because that baby doesn't have a thinking brain. It can't go, oh, well, I shouldn't be so upset. It doesn't matter. They can't process it. The mother has to process it. So how she talks to the child, soothes the child, calms the child, recognise that child's distressed, not to leave the child cry till they cry out. They stop crying. That's when they've gone into submission and trauma. They shut it down. So the mother needs to go whenever the child is upset to work it out. Initially, you might have, oh, is it wet? Is it hungry? Try feeding. No, it's still upset. So let's soothe, calm, rocking, music, nice music, singing to the child, just, touch. Most powerful thing you can do with a baby. So until the baby calms down, but you talk to it and soothe it. Some sing to it, some sing hymns to the child, like little children's ones, and pray. And from a Christian perspective, you have those tools as well to help that child. So once you've calmed the child and the child's calmed down, then there's that release happening. That child is now back on home base with mum. So that trauma on. They haven't loaded it in emotionally because mum has helped soothe and calm them. So they're learning to regulate emotions by the way mum deals with it when they're upset. Like if there's a really loud noise and the child is startled and cries, to go and soothe and calm and really have a calm voice until the child is settled, and then they're back on track again. Does that make sense?
Right? Yeah.
If there's a disconnection from mum, the mum has to learn that and reconnect. And it's not about getting it right every time. It's about recognising it and doing it. Okay?
So it's not the odd occasions when the mum might be away for some reason, even when they are a few months old, which it's happened with me as well. And then I gone back and thought, is this because of those times when I left them, on their own? So you can reconnect and, fix that.
And whoever they're with, if they're a good caregiver and take over the role of mum and recognise and soothe and calm and do all that, it's a good stopgap. But then mum needs to reconnect and spend time with the child. And even children do know tone of voice. And even if you explain, oh, mum had to go away and she's back now, and they do get it. Don't underestimate the child's brain's capacity to take it in, even if it's verbal, because it's got tones, it's got non-verbals. So don't see as, oh, they don't understand. That's what I hear. Oh, well, they wouldn't understand. So yes, they do.
Or they won't remember.
Yes. Yeah. Now, if in the unforeseen thing happens and that child doesn't get enough of that, what we call secure attachment, then later in life, the good news is that with the right help and bonding with others, they will catch up. Emotionally, they'll catch up. Okay, so that means emotional healing in the present further down the track is relevant to developing healthy, supportive, loving relationships that take that role. And it doesn't have to be an intimate one. It can be a friendship, even a professional person who you develop a bond with that client helps the healing process. So that's the good news, that we can correct that damage at any time if we've got the right connection, and then learning, understanding and learning. So teaching, like with my clients, teaching them why that happens and what they can do, and have a look at who are they really connected to and how that can work for them. So bringing it to the conscious level further down the track. That's it's not set in concrete.
It's really good to know.
Yes.
And I guess one thing I'm also thinking about is that you talked about the child crying themselves to sleep, or eventually they calm down, and it's not necessarily a good sign. So would you say that that's not a good idea, actually crying themselves to sleep?
No. It's not a good idea. It means mum might be a bit sleep deprived, or dad might have to take over. And one of the most powerful ones is touching, just soothing the child. I used to look after, I had a neighbour who had 4 children pretty close together, and she had to work, and dad was out working, and so I would get them, she'd send them to me because I wasn't working, and they would come over to me. And her last little boy, he was often anxious, distressed, and she would just leave. She said, he'll go to sleep eventually. If I went in, or when I had him at my place, he was like that. I found if I rubbed his tummy, just soothing, like doing that on his tummy, very quickly he'd go down and go back to sleep. That was a calming response for his heart and trauma. And she said, he never goes back to sleep. And I explained to her, but I don't think, because she was so busy, she had 4 of them, 3 others, and working and a marriage. So it's hard when you're in that position. But I became a bit of a surrogate there, where whether I was with him, I could actually do that, which made a difference. So it doesn't take a lot. Even now, as they grow older, I know yours are growing up, but if they're really distressed, just sitting and touching and rubbing and, rub their back or rub them here and talk to them calmly, get them to do some breathing, you soon reconnect with them. And because when they're upset, they disconnect, you reconnect and they calm down. So you're teaching them soothing, you're teaching them to calm down. Now, as adults, this is where traumatized adults don't know how to do that. They feel totally unsafe. So this is where learning, put them into a safe place. And again, this is some of the things we could look at if we can trauma further down the track, because it's learning to self-regulate, to be able to self-soothe and self-calm. And if we can't do that, we're just going to get distressed and end up sobbing and in tears and go to bed like it and wake up like it. It's,
That's so true. And really good tips for all of us, to take away from this.
So there are a couple of other things I put in, like our baggage from the past, and that conception to birth and then up to about 2 years are crucial years. But it does relate to parental relationships, which we've talked about, the models around us, siblings, children, other adults that come into our world. And nowadays, unfortunately, a lot of kids are in front, even pre-2, are in front of a TV and bizarre things and stuff adults are watching and don't think it affects. It does. They take everything in, particularly advertising. So this is where the baby's brain is really doing overload with all the wrong models. Also, relationship experiences. Some children, you have to really work at developing a relationship. I've had friends who've had several children, and one, duck to water, you can go in and it's immediately connect and do something with them, and there's one who'll stand back, and you've got to really not push them and just sit quietly and encourage them. So it's learning to read children in that way. So those relationship experiences are powerful. Also, what we grow up learning and believing, and that's based on our models, like how mum and dad are in relationships, how the siblings are, and often siblings will do everything to split mum and dad. That's what kids then soon model and learn. A young child or a baby only needs to see it once to learn it. There. It's like the first time you say no, what are they going to do? Every no. they parrot it. But if you do yes, I parrot that one, they're going to do the no.
Yeah, it's easier to take on the no.
No, I know that one. So beliefs and values, particularly about relationships, are important. So if mum gives lip service and tells you don't do that, or dad says you're not allowed to do that, don't treat me like that, yet he's treating mum like that, children know hypocrisy. So there has to be consistency between the parents, between the siblings, and between the child. And that's a real challenge, particularly if mum and dad are working. We've got a lot of stress now. You go back to that COVID experience. So there's all these variables that we have to go through now that to help our children grow and develop. But certainly putting the effort in, working on your own stuff, being able to regulate your own emotions is the best model you can do to help your child as they grow. So
that's very true. I've learned that to be true as well.
The pre-2 thing we were talking about, up to 2, if the child is set regularly, and we did talk about it doesn't always happen, but it's what mum does afterwards, or dad, or a primary caregiver that the child bonds with, helps them through that event. They feel securely attached. So if they're floundering, someone comes, gives them secure attachment, and they're fine again. So by the time they're the age of 2, they're going to, their personality and their relationship development will be balanced and healthy because they've had that secure attachment. Okay. If the child doesn't have that, and there are many, many reasons why children, look at the war-torn zones now. There's all sorts of issues in the world. There's a lot of abuse and trauma comes into a family. It might not be mum and dad, but so many people have been abused by others, children in all sorts of horrific ways. So, you know, it's really difficult. But if they're not securely attached or protected, at the age of 2, the brain starts to shift from, instead of secure balance, it goes to either having to have control to feel safe or into emotional chaos. So this is where the personality develops either in a balanced way if they're securely attached. If not, it's insecure attachment creates the control disorders, where the terrible twos, where the child can be rebellious, defiant. It will develop anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive, all these control disorders, or it goes total emotional chaos. Can't cope emotionally, all over the place. Anything emotionally, the brain just deranges and can't focus and function. So you've got, and you get depression, the anxiety. So you get these extremes, which is why people who are not securely attached, who have insecure attachment, are highly traumatized children, often get labeled further down the track with what they call bipolar disorder or mood swings. And it's not a biological bipolar, but they'll be given medication for that purpose, but it's actually a personality development bipolar, because the brain isn't secure, so it can either go one extreme or the other. And you find that people with trauma, they're either having to control everything to feel safe, or they do emotional meltdown, and you know, they can self-harm and do all these other extremes.
So there's a trauma response. Huh?
It's a trauma response. It triggers the mood swing, it triggers the extreme, because that's how the brain's developed. Now, for the brain to develop the other way, which is where we need to deal with the trauma that we've talked about, having more skills to work with the trauma in the present moment, which the scope of what we're doing today isn't going to do, but we can do. So, but this is giving insight or overview. Okay. So, of course, then when we're in the present, are we feeling loved or rejected? And if we feel insecure, we're likely to keep picking relationships where we get rejected and abandoned, because that's where we're at. Okay. So if we're balanced and healthy, we're going to attract that. We attract where we're at, and we often attract the model of relationship we had growing up. So in other words, and I'm aware of that, the man I was married 36 years, he's passed away through to cancer, health problems, which is very sad. But I found he was a lot like my dad in his interests and his hobbies and what he did and how he presented, but he also had aspects of like my mum. So it's sort of, I could see I'd been attracted to someone who fitted the family model. That good, the bad and the ugly, the whole lot. You know, there was a whole range of, and we do that. And you know, I get people, I think I married my father, I married my mother. But of course, it's the uncomfortable comfort zone. It's like we're attracted to what we know because that's what we know and that's what we're comfortable with. So this is where, so this is where we have this. I liken it to having shoes. You know, I've got shoes I love, and then they get holes and wear out, and I'm really sad because I love those shoes. They're so comfortable. But if I put on shoes, what does it take? They're often tight and they've got to loosen up, and I've got to break them in, so to speak. That's a bit like the way we are. But what we do, we go back to the old pair of shoes, and it's like we go back to the old way of doing things, the old relationships, even if they're going to leak and let dirt in and do the whole bit. We go with what we know, even if it's not good for us. Does that make sense? But we don't know it. Yeah. So this is where, again, awareness in the present and being educated and learning and doing your timeline and looking at the patterns. Okay, what did you learn? Think about, what did I learn from my parents? What did I learn from my family? You know, and don't blame. I mean, my parents did the best they could. I knew I was loved, but they were highly dysfunctional because of the culture, because of the era, because of what they'd been subjected to with the war and the depression. Right? So in understanding helps you, one, to forgive. It helps you to work in the present. It helps you to stop carrying the baggage. Right? So it's a lot of work to do in the present moment to separate the past in the way it's controlling you and bringing you down, to be right in the present, to deal with things that come up and know, is it past, or, you know, am I now reacting, overreacting, or whatever. Then we set up a better future. right? Because we now we attract more stable people and situations in our life. Okay, so if we're stable, then we don't look at things negative. You go, oh, I'm doing really well. Oh, I'd like to meet someone and have a good relationship, so they project in a more balanced way. Whereas the person who's been used and abused and highly traumatized, and relationships have been an incredible trauma, they put a lot of fear into meeting other people. In fact, some of them isolate, they get anxious, phobias, which are part of the anxiety disorders or the control disorders, because of their fear. And then they're alone, they're isolated, life's miserable, they don't connect. So you can see how we then project into the future. So where we're at from the past into the present is what our expectations of relationships are. Like someone who's had a terrible time, they might have had 2 marriages where they've been abusive, and they go, oh yeah, if I get married again, the same thing will happen.
Yeah.
They don't think that I can change it. Let's work on changing it because I'm sick of that. I want to have something. Yeah, that's the whole thing.
I've heard that.
Yeah, we project our beliefs and values about ourselves and about others. We have what we call a negative bias or a positive bias. So a negative bias isn't good for us, but that means we put on those glasses and look at everyone as the perpetrator or the problem. So we can't filter out, well, hang on, they're a really nice person. We misinterpret.
Yes. And what's interesting as well, that I could see that people that have actually escaped war, people that have been through war, seem to cope better in the present than people who have unhealthy relationships or that have had this unhealthy, the trauma from their childhood especially. So that's interesting. I always wondered, how our parents, for example, they went through years of hunger and war and everything, but they seem all right. Yet this, this generation, the young generation.
Yeah, had that one. Interesting, because this was quite a few decades ago, and when I was living in Melbourne, I studied and worked there, and I was doing some counselling with Holocaust survivors. And the men wouldn't come to me, but the women would. It was at a health centre. And the women they would share their story, how they survived and what they did, and they had a lot of courage, and they'd stand up to authorities, and they became more respected and got things, things for the other women who needed something. They did heroic acts, and they came out, like you said, very resilient, because, what's the worst I'm going to do? If not, I'm going to die anyway, so let's give it a go. And they were the ones who got involved in the community, helped others, had a much better life, even though they still had that trauma. Whereas I found a lot of the men didn't know how to deal with it, and they would just shut down and become quite reclusive, isolated, more prone to dementia or depression disorders, and they would bottle it. Whereas the women wouldn't, because women like to communicate. So part of that resilience was communication. So it's a gender factor, but it's also how we dealt. And when you have a hard time and you come through it, don't you get stronger?
Yeah, you should.
You feel stronger. Wow, I got through that.
I can do more now.
Yes, yeah. If that happens again, I'll know what to do. It's
exactly.
Whereas, if we carry the trauma of it, then we avoid, we shut down, and we're easily re-traumatized. So what we do in the present is powerful.
Rewiring the brain. So obviously we're talking about relationships, and what about people used to get married more, but now that doesn't happen as much. So why do you think that is, that people are not going into actually that commitment anymore as much?
There's quite a history. You've got to go back historically for this. Like if you're just looking at Australia's origins were from England and Europe, and a lot of them they had Christian beliefs and values. It was considered a Christian country where marriage was sacred, and relationships, you stayed married. or you work through things. So, and it doesn't mean all marriages were really successful, but they had a strength and resilience, and took on a challenge, and they had the thing of not just falling in love and then, well, that's it, it's over. They would work at a relationship. So some very good marriages and relationships came from it, and they committed as parents to raise their children and have a life afterwards. So that has changed, and some of that is to do with the current, certainly educational policies. When you look at what children are learning, what they watch, like social media, they've been brought up on soap operas, a lot of them. In Australia, it started with things like Neighbours, and there were a lot of US soapies. And so people, and that's based on the trauma, and that will be also relevant to what we'll be talking about next, about that soap opera mentality and the emotional roller coaster principle. But you get a lot of young people now, and I'm not saying all, I know some lovely young people, and those young people I know have very good values or Christian values, and they commit. See, nowadays, commitment, you don't commit, let's try it and see if we like it, because I can easily leave. I've had, people have been together and say, aren't you going to get married? No, if I can leave if I want to. So see, it comes back to those beliefs and values that now instilled through the media, through Hollywood. There are all sorts of avenues, and the young people, all these games they play, quite violent games, and it's not about connection. And so you have a look, and I'm not saying all kids do it, but a high proportion of children do that. There's abuse on social media. Children, young people have suicided because of social media. They've been bullied on social media and they can't deal with it. So when you have a look at commitment and relationships for this generation and the last few generations, it's changed from when I was growing up, where you got married and you stayed married and you worked at it. So you can see some of that is definitely generational. It's learned. Yeah. It comes back to growing and maturing. We talked about that, living in the present and maturing. There are a lot of very immature young people around, and yet I find those who are mature are amazing. They've got a good intelligence, they do well, they study, they learn, they have good careers, and can have good relationships. So I'm sort of painting both sides of the picture here. I think probably what we see more of in the media are the disasters of young people and how they abuse each other. And I mean, I walk down the streets at times over the last, say, 2 decades, and there's a younger couple screaming and yelling and pushing, and I never used to see that. That was something you did behind closed doors if you did it when I was growing up. Nowadays, you just let it all hang out. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, wow.
It is a lack of commitment. And I know, because I was involved in education for a couple of decades, and I ended up doing some workshop things with kids, and what they were being taught, and sadly this is from a government level, it's okay to have lots of relationships as long as you do it safely, and we'll provide the means for safe sex, basically. And then the same with drugs and alcohol, and we'll educate you how not to be so affected or to do it safely. So it was never a thing, and they were encouraged. It's okay to have lots of different relationships, whereas I didn't grow up like that. The beliefs and values of the culture have changed. Our country is now no longer considered a Christian value country. It's multicultural. It's got different beliefs and values. There are a lot of people who have no religious affiliation or spiritual connection on that level. I mean, sport has become the major icon. When you have a look at,
that's so true.
So it's just different. It's
a decision, though, isn't it? Like back in the day, as they say, you didn't think you have that option of just getting out of the marriage and finding someone else. But now we think we have that option. And then so now we come up with excuses that, he wasn't really unfaithful, but he looked funny at someone. So I just considered that unfaithfulness. So I'm just going to walk out because I wanted to do that anyways.
Yeah, I know. It's just the reason to do it. But you also have a look at divorce. You go back in my history, was to get a divorce was a major it's a hard road to get a divorce, and the woman was shunned as the black sheep, and other couples didn't want to know the woman if she was divorced because she might pinch their husband. And I mean, it was a whole cloak and dagger thing, and just to get divorced cost lots of money, and it was a shame factor, whereas nowadays it's nothing to get a divorce. But I find the younger generations are going, oh no, if I get married and I don't like it, they'll take half of what I've got. Yeah, so
let's not get married then.
Yeah, so I won't get married. I'll be more financially secure. So it's sort of the values on a relationship. And again, I'm not saying all young people, but this is like when we look at mainstream and just the culture generally, this is what's happening. And then a lot of them, if their parents have split up or had abusive upbringing, you know, then why should I get married if that's what it's about? So there's all these factors.
Yeah, so obviously we are surrounded by all the factors, but is there something we can do, I guess, to improve?
Well, the thing is, if young people want to change it, they can. I find a lot of young people are very entitled these days, and they are highly intelligent. They have a good IQ, but their emotional intelligence is not always mature, so they often base decisions on that, but they've got a very good IQ. So they're intelligent people, but often with intelligence, you don't think you need help. You know, I find traumatized people are highly intelligent. The personality is developed into a dysfunctional one, but because they're intelligent, they can't see they have a problem. Everyone else does but them. So they maintain that dysfunction because of their intelligence. So you've got to want help or recognize you've got a problem. And that goes for any age group, whether it be in my era, your era, younger people. If they don't think they've got a problem, they won't change it. Yeah, so how can you change it? But if you have young people in your life, like I do connect with a few young people, and I've sometimes helped them, counseled them, given them a bit of advice. You know, they observe you, young people, if they see you're all right and they trust you, they're more likely to communicate. So open communication, I think, if you know young people and they're struggling. Yeah, so on that we can help.
So you're talking about counseling, obviously. So what's the role of counseling, but also maybe seeking some educational resources, either before going into the relationship or when the relationships have broken down, how to repair, heal, and prevent future breakdowns?
Okay, well, there are a lot of good avenues now for counselling. Whether it be in Christian circles or mainstream. There are a lot of groups. This is where governments have given funds for groups to get help or funding to get the help they need. There are lots of good programs around that people can do. There's a lot more available than when I was growing up in those avenues. And I mean, this is where now with things like YouTube, you can always have a look at everything on YouTube about personality development, trauma, dealing with things. There's so many great resources. If someone wants to, there are resources available.
And it is important, isn't it? Because I think when we are younger, we don't realize we need help because, of course, we're in love and we think, oh, I'm going to love everything about this person. And then we realize, no, we start seeing that he snores maybe or, you know, does funny things. And then that's probably when we need the counseling, right? When we start seeing the character flaws and all of that.
If we're suffering and we can't hold a good relationship or build a good relationship, instead of going, oh, I can't be with that person, I need someone else, we will always pick the same pattern because that's what we're stuck in. We need help. There's no shame in getting help, and it can be self-help. There's so many good books around now written by people on those things, how to have better relationships, how to know what you need to change. There's all sorts of written material, visual material on media and that, like the programs you're doing. So there's plenty around that you can share with people or get them to do. So it's not that there isn't there, it's actually using the resources that are available. Some people don't want counselling, they don't want to go to a counsellor, but they will read a book or they'll watch something on a video or something. So, so we can help.
There is a book, What Your Counselor Never Told You. That's what I started reading just recently. And
Yes.
I think it is really good for people, like you said, that don't want to maybe go to a counselor.
There's all sorts of things you can get. It's just these because kids are intelligent. They will. Some kids don't read and write well, but they'll go and watch something on video visually. It doesn't matter how you learn it. And this is where parents of young people, what they do about it, they need to be educated sometimes. They go, my child has a problem there in their adolescence and they're really struggling. Let me find out more about it. And I think on that timeline, what a parent does in the present to help that child is very powerful. So it's being aware, and at a young age, connecting and communication is powerful. Being able to listen to your child, make time for your child when they come home from school, listen to them, talk to them, find out what they're interested in, what they like. Help to build that trusting relationship, because if a child grows up trusting you, if they're in trouble, they'll come to you. But if they think you're going to criticize, condemn, or control them, they won't come near you. So we have to give up that critical parenting or the controlling parenting and letting them know, look, it doesn't matter what you do, I still love you and I'll help you. So if there's something that you find's not good in your life, come to me, we'll talk about it and see what you can do. You know, so it's giving them that message, not waiting till things go wrong. And when they're young, actually being aware of, oh, you look a bit upset today. If they've been to a school, and they might say, is everything okay? And they go, oh, this girl picked on me. And, you know, they get the stories that come out. And that's powerful, because you can help them and say, oh, well, what'd you say? Or what'd they say? You know, so you can help the child then to learn some verbal skills or boundary skills as they're growing.
It is difficult. As a parent, you want to prevent that from happening again. So you tell them, never do this again. And so they may not come and tell you next time from the fear of being reprimanded.
So instead of going, you might do this again. And if you do, come and talk to me and we'll work it out. Instead of not giving that control thing of, don't you dare, you mustn't do that. You know, I was brought up with a controlling parent for fear that, and the fear for my mother was that she'd be put to shame in the community if I wasn't doing the right thing at the right time. And I as an adult, once I realized that as I was growing up, it helped me to resolve a lot of things, because it was what will people think, was a lot of shame messages, guilt messages, and control messages. So, and doesn't affect me now because I've resolved it and gone through it, and I understood why my mother did it. So
yeah, you're talking about control, of course. So can we talk a little bit about control then, to just finish it off? Why do we use control in relationships, and what are some of the power plays, I guess, that can happen between people that contribute to the relationship becoming unhealthy or healthy? Or is there a healthy way or not?
Well, there is a healthy way. It's not about control. It's about resolution more than control. But if we try and control things, then we have problems. And really, most relationships that we look at, or the ones that are failing, are about control. So what we do, and I know we don't have time to explore it all, but we can look at that next session as well. And this is about resolving conflict. It's from a book called Resolving Conflict in Relation, or this is in relationships, but it was conflict resolution book. And it showed two power plays. The first one is what we call a power triangle. And in that power triangle, it was called the power game triangle. And in each of them, because the triangle has 3 points. So it's about weaving the process or the web, and who's in control is the question. So in this power game triangle, you've got 3 dynamics in people. You have what we call a persecutor or a perpetrator, a rescuer, and a victim. Okay, it's an unequal power base. So who would you say has the most power in that? You've got a persecutor, a rescuer, and a victim. Who's the major controller there? They can all be controlling. Who do you think?
Probably the persecutor.
Yep, absolutely. The persecutor does not see they're a persecutor. They think they're okay and everyone else isn't, and they have to make them okay. So they have to control everything. They protect themselves. They can be authoritarian. They're wanting obedience and they want power over things. So they are better than or greater than. Okay. Now, that means they're going to pick friends or relationships or marriages where they have someone to control. Okay.
And
so then
you tell them they are a persecutor, they'll become the victim.
yes, they can be the victim then. Oh no, look at the terrible things I've done. But the persecutor, and I'm just looking at the general principles, we've got then we've got the person who becomes the victim. So if you have someone, the bully is a persecutor. They're bullying, they put you down, they control you. Well, I grew up with guilt messages, shame messages, what will everyone think messages, which isn't a high level of nasty control. It was out of concern that I was given the messages, but I felt the victim. Now, if I do that, I feel guilty or shameful, so I wasn't free of that control, right? But then the other thing you can then do, the third dynamic, is a rescuer. So the victim, you look, oh, I'm not okay. There's lots of things wrong with me because the persecutor keeps telling you that. You think you're okay, but you're not okay. But then the rescuer thinks they're okay and the others aren't okay, so they've got to fix it. Mr. and Mrs. Fix it. I've got to rescue them. You know, like the husband who's the controller, they've got to obey and rescue, or the victim, they'll rescue the victim. So if one of the children in that dynamic is the victim, the mother might be the rescuer if the father's the persecutor, or it can be the mother's the persecutor, which is, oh, she's always nagging and I can't do anything and da-da-da. And the father can become the rescuer. And things like in families, don't tell your father, don't tell your mother is a way of control. Keep them in victimhood or rescue them by overprotecting them. I know of families where abuse has been an issue, so the mother would rescue the children by actually helping them to be safe. Oh, your dad's coming home, here, have something to eat and go to bed early, things like that. So you can see how this plays out. And I learned to be a rescuer, which means I've had to stop being the rescuer and help people get well instead of rescuing them. See how that works.
Because it can be exhausting, can't it?
Oh, it is. All of those are exhausting and they're not healthy. It's a constant. And you're right, we can switch channels. The persecutor can become the rescuer or the victim gets had enough of it. I'm sick of being the victim. They become the persecutor. You see, and we can be all three of them in a relationship, switch roles, which is, and this is the soap opera I mentioned before. This is a soap opera mentality where you've got the, they have those three prongs in a soapy. So they leave you on a cliffhanger with either the persecutor running amok and the person's being the victim, or the victim's in a, you know, a dying stage or whatever, or the rescuer has a plan and then you've got to wait for the next episode, which is a bit like life. So then we've got the other one is the discovery triangle, and this is about taking charge and being in control. And it's not about controlling others, it's about having self-control. So with the when you have a perpetrator in your midst, you might, or someone who is trying to control, teaching them and learning, getting the perpetrator to learn, but teaching, like the perpetrator, if they, instead of persecuting, teach you, show you, look, I find that really annoys me, so instead of trying to control it, I'll teach you a better way to do it, or I'll communicate with you. See, they learn skills. They explain instead of controlling it. Okay, they can start to, if they want to stop being the persecutor, they have to learn to respect others' points of view, whether they agree or disagree, not trying to make the person believe everything they believe. Okay, then
that's the healthier
way of doing it. So there's always an unhealthy and a healthy. So if the person who's persecuting and controlling can recognize it and find better ways of having the outcome without persecuting or controlling the person, they can then be loved and respected in a relationship. Okay. Learning versus being the victim. So the victim has to learn not to be the victim. They have to learn to help themselves to take charge of their life, to improve their situation, or to explore and discover other ways of doing it, or learning better skills to stop the person who's putting them in that victim state, to be able to stand up to them in a healthy way. That's a learning process, okay? The third one is for the rescuer is to learn to mediate versus rescue. So instead of trying to rescue them from the situation, they might mediate, they might support them, they might help them identify what they really need instead of providing it all for them. They might give appropriate help versus doing it for them. They might help to settle differences instead of fueling them. Does that make sense?
Yes. And we can talk more about that, I guess, unpack a little bit more in our next sessions as well. Yeah.
All these models interact. When we look at that past, present, and future, the discovery triangle is relevant to the present. What model am I using? All right. We can only change it in the present. So it's the same when we go to the next thing we're going to look at, how we protect ourselves. This is relevant to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we recap, Jenifer, would you like to remind us, because your interviews can be found on 3ABN, and then you've got interviews on a radio channel as well.
Yes.
Which one was?
Okay. I currently do a weekly, about a 15-minute segment on mental health, basically on our health generally and skills building on Faith FM. It's a radio station. It is national. You can find it, unless you've got a receiving tower near you, you can get it online. You can get an app on your phone. So it's called Faith FM radio. You can listen to it on your app, or you can listen to it online. They also, if you go into their webpage, they have podcasts, and they're now putting my segment on a podcast because people want to listen to it again. Or you can listen to it as a morning program at about 7:40 to about 5 to 8 every Wednesday morning. I'm on there. So, and again, it's skills building, the sort of thing I'm doing here, but it's more in a discussion format, which often uses humour and examples, things like that. The 3ABN, I have got health talks that go back. The first lot I did was in 2016, and that was with Dr. John Clark, who we've been interviewing. So that series, I think you can still watch it on 3ABN. I'm currently videoing more with them on health. Some of it will be what I'm sharing with you, but this is on like mental, emotional, physical health. And we've started doing that, but I don't know when it will be available for viewing. They will let me know when they're going to air it. So, and that will be ongoing for a little while too. So if people want to catch up with me or do more, and of course we've already got a few of them that we've done together on here on Take Charge of Your Health that they can do.
Yes, they are in our live section in our YouTube channel. So we encourage everyone to, watch those presentations and interviews with you as well, because not everyone can get sessions with you, individual sessions with you. You've been very busy, of course. We know that. This is a good way, I guess, to educate ourselves and have them on file. Yeah. So we want to thank you again, Jenifer. And we are looking forward to the next session. Just quickly reminding everyone to send in your questions to us at takechargeofyourhealth101@gmail.com, and we'll try to address them either in the next sessions, or we will have a Q&A segment. And before we meet, subscribe, share with your friends as well, and stay in touch and stay tuned so that you don't miss our next sessions. Can we ask you to close with a word of prayer, Jenifer?
Okay. Dear Father in heaven, we've been through a lot of material in this session that can be helpful for people. And the good news is they can view it again. And we know with your spirit and your help that the people who are learning to grow in your grace can achieve any goal they want through your strength. So also help us to learn and grow with the skills which are biblically oriented, and I find there are some wonderful verses in the Bible. So please open hearts and minds to that truth and help us to grow and have better relationships, because that's what it's all about. You want a relationship with us, and as well as healthy relationships with others. So please bless us in this way and help us all to grow and learn. And certainly we know you'll be coming back soon, dear Jesus, so help us to be ready in that vein. We ask you and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.